Challenger is Jim Schultz. He's a Republican, and you're listening to a live debate from MPR News. Jim Schultz, you have proposed adding a number of criminal attorneys to the criminal division. Mm-hmm. How many would you add? How much would that cost? How would you get it done?
So just one thing, the Attorney General is wrong here. So Chapter 8 does outline some authority for the Attorney General. There are other statutes, including 602, 902, and under which he can prosecute criminal cases, not civil cases, criminal cases. He has not done so. He has failed to do so. He's failed to do so. So beyond that, now I'm going to add dramatically more criminal prosecutors to the office. We have to have it. It's embarrassing that the Attorney General has not done this. We need to respond to this historic moment in our state in which we're living through the worst increase in violent crime in many decades, and it is not enough for the Attorney General in Minnesota to throw up his hands and say, well, I can't really do much here. The only thing I can do is sue Fleet Farm. That is not enough. That is not enough, and what we need to do is to have a roster of world-class criminal prosecutors that can support county attorneys around the state and ensure that we end this revolving door where criminals are not held accountable for their actions. Criminals don't feel like there are penalties associated with their crime right now. And so as a result, they commit dramatically more crime. We're going to end that.
What happens if the legislature doesn't give you the money to do that? What do you stop doing in order to do that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've been very open on this. I mean, unlike Keith Ellison, I won't show up at the legislature at the 11th hour without having built any relationships with the legislature. I've already started working on building relationships across the aisle in the legislature so that we can get the funding we need for key priorities. Now, this is the fundamental priority for the Attorney General's office of the state of Minnesota right now. To the extent we don't get the funding, we will reallocate resources from within the office. It has a $50 million budget. It is a massive budget. We can move resources around as needed to ensure we have the criminal prosecutors that we need, and I will absolutely do it to deal with the people being shot on our streets every day. And it's not enough for the Attorney General to throw up his hands after the legislature says no.
Keith Ellison.
First of all, I want to just call for a fact check on what our authority is to override the wishes of a local county attorney on a crime. I'll just leave it right there. Let me also say that, look, I was a state legislator. I know all the state legislators. They're friends on both sides of the aisle. Let me say, I worked with Senator Rosen and Representative Baker to pass the legislation that returned 75% of all the money that we won back to local counties, and I did it on a bipartisan basis. So the idea of who knows the legislature around here, I hope nobody's seriously entertaining this. I was a legislator for 4 years here. I was a federal legislator, not for 15 years, just 12. And so, that's wrong. In terms of reallocation, let me just note, we have a statutory obligation to represent state agencies. That's Chapter 8.06, Mr. Schultz, and so let me just say we can't just reallocate as we care to. We've reallocated as much as we can, and we'll do more if we can get more money. We've made that very clear. And as a matter of fact, we've got the support of the governor and the state legislature and many people in the Senate. We just haven't had the support of Mary Kiffmeyer, quite frankly. And, she's not there anymore, so we're hoping that we will be able to break through in the next term. But, the idea that you're going to do better in the legislature than we have done is really silly, given that you've never served in the body at all and never worked with them whatsoever. And you can't just reallocate the way you're saying. You can't do it.
Jim Schultz, let me ask you a question that goes back to some of how this all started, really. Mm-hmm. And that is that a police officer in Minneapolis killed somebody. If the Hennepin County Attorney's Office asked you to criminally prosecute a police officer for killing someone, would you do it?
Well, absolutely. To the extent a case was to be brought, absolutely. The killing of George Floyd. I don't think anybody could have watched the video of the killing of George Floyd without feeling physically ill. That was so deeply wrong. It was a murder. It was second-degree murder, and the fact is, if comparable circumstances or other instances where police violate the law, we would absolutely hold them accountable. Absolutely. And to the extent it's in partnership with county attorneys or to the extent the office were to take the case exclusively, absolutely. We have to ensure that everyone in our state is held accountable for crime, and that includes police officers. Now, the fact is, the bad police officers out there are few and far between. Unfortunately, the rhetoric of many in public office, including Keith Ellison, have slandered and maligned many folks in law enforcement. We can't have that. And we have to ensure that we have an office that fundamentally supports law enforcement, even as we hold them to accountable, as any police officer will acknowledge, they totally expect to be held accountable to standards.
And Derek Chauvin is appealing his murder conviction. Attorney General Ellison brought in a special a team of lawyers in that case. Would you keep those lawyers on the case, and would you fight to uphold that conviction?
I would certainly fight to uphold the conviction. In terms of keeping ultimately I'd have to review the prosecutors on the case, see if we're aligned strategically and otherwise. But I certainly would be receptive to doing so. What we need, absolutely, we have to ensure that Derek Chauvin was appropriately prosecuted, and we have to we would continue to bring that case forward. Absolutely.
Attorney General Ellison, another high-profile case, Kim Potter, who shot and killed Dante Wright in Brooklyn Center. When your office took over the case from the Washington County attorney, the original charge was second-degree manslaughter. Your office increased that to first degree. Why did you do that?
Well, thank you for the question. What we did is we took a fresh look at the case. And I just want to note that, that case was originally in Hennepin County. Pete Orput took that case for Hennepin County. And then Pete Orput, who was a wonderful man and a dear friend of mine and a great county attorney who was, we lost him to a serious illness. Before he died, he said, look, I can't have these protesters out here. Would you take this case? And I said, yes. I didn't ask for the case. But what we did is we took a fresh look at what the facts were. What were the facts? What the facts is that Kim Potter shot Dante Wright with a 9mm Glock when she thought she had a taser. So in other words, she didn't know she had a gun in her hand when she used it. We thought that was a reckless discharge of a firearm. And when somebody dies as a result of that, under the statutory law, that's first-degree manslaughter. Now, the charge and the sentence are not necessarily the same. We do have sentencing guidelines, but after she was convicted by a jury of her peers, the judge gave her a more lenient sentence. We did not appeal it. She said she was sorry. That meant something to me. I thought that was important. And so that's how that case was handled. We charged what we thought the facts showed, the jury agreed, and she was sentenced according to law and was given a downward departure, which we did not oppose.
Jim Schultz, the Republican candidate for governor, Scott Jensen, has said if he's elected, he would try to commute Kim Potter's sentence. Of course, the governor can't do that on his own. There's a three-member pardons board, the Attorney General, the governor, and the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Would you vote to commute Kim Potter's sentence?
I'll say first, Kim Potter served for 26 years admirably on a police force. She was a real leader on her police force. What she received by being prosecuted for first-degree manslaughter was entirely inappropriate from the Attorney General's office. Any attorney who looks at the first-degree manslaughter statute and reads it can only conclude that she did not commit first-degree manslaughter. It was fundamentally politically motivated. This is so representative of Attorney General Ellison's office. It's all about the politics around it. He upcharged her to first-degree manslaughter for political reasons. That was deeply, deeply wrong. We cannot have an Attorney General's office influenced by politics. Now, I have been on the record.
Keith Ellison just respond quickly, and then we'll come back.
Okay.
So you might not realize this, Jim, but every defendant has a right to make a motion for dismissal for lack of probable cause. Her able defense counsel did so, and Judge Chu denied the motion on the grounds that there was probable cause for the charge. The case went forward to a jury of 12 Hennepin County residents, and they found her guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, I believe in the jury system. There was nothing political about this. This was entirely by the book. This case will withstand any sort of appeal. It was a fair trial, 100%. And the thing is, the charge and the sentence are different. That's just, but I know that because I've been a lawyer for 32 years. I know that because I know my way around the criminal courts in Hennepin County, Ramsey County, federal court, state court, appellate court, any kind of court. And so you would say these things because you simply have zero experience dealing with it.
Jim Schultz.
Well, same thing. I mean, you, Keith, you did spend a few years as a criminal prosecutor. You represented a man who was implicated in the killing of in the execution of a police officer. You represented a man who shook to death his 5-month-old son. You represented a man who was a cocaine dealer who murdered 3 people. You do have some relevant experience in the area. I will say, just on this, I've been very open on the commutation of Kim Potter's sentence. Absolutely, her sentence should be commuted. That was mob justice. It was not representative of Minnesota values. Now, Keith Ellison will say, oh, well, this work I did, back in the 90s is I was a criminal defense attorney, and that's fine. It's fine that we have to obviously need capable criminal defense attorneys. But unfortunately, he has brought the mentality of criminal defense attorneys to the Attorney General's office, where he is fundamentally focused on the criminals. Ensuring that criminals get what he thinks is appropriate justice and not the rights of victims to be protected from crime. That is a theme throughout his time as Attorney General. It is deeply disturbing, and you can see it through all of his time in office.
Keith Ellison, please respond.
27 convicted criminals spending time in Minnesota prisons because the AG's office convicted them would disagree. We have prosecuted and convicted the most serious criminals in our state from Aiken County, Todd County, from Pennington County, from all over the state of Minnesota, including Hennepin, and we've even reviewed cases in Ramsey, although we never charged any out. This is simply a poorly informed point of view. It's inaccurate, and we have been very, and again, I look at the men and women in our criminal group, and they are very hardworking, diligent. They have great compassion for victims. I've sat with victims myself. You never have, by the way. You never have sat with a victim. I've sat with families grieving, crying, raging over what happened to their loved one, and I feel their passion and their pain. But it's something that you can only think about theoretically speaking in a political campaign. And I think you're the one who's politicizing this. And if I just may finish here, Mike, the bottom line is I've prosecuted, I've also defended. That's how come I know the whole system. That's actually an asset. And I believe in the 6th Amendment to the United States Constitution and the Minnesota Constitution, which gives criminal defendants the right to counsel and other rights. Now, he's attacking that. But what kind of democracy will we have if people didn't have some rights? Yes, I am a prosecutor who prosecutes hard, but also believes in the defendant's rights too.
Jim Schultz.
Keith, I actually have sat with a victim. The victim was my sister. A man careened his car into her yard one morning. He was on chase with police. He was shooting out his back windows at police that morning. There was gunfire on her front lawn. It left multiple bullet holes in her home while she was there. Police officers had to rush in to get her out of the house so she wasn't hit by a stray bullet. I still remember her calling me crying that morning. I still remember meeting with the BCA that night with the tape all taped off around it. I have sat with victims. And frankly, Keith, I think part of the reason why people are so disturbed is that despite seeing the incredible numbers of victims in our communities, you have continually backed extreme policies that have led to the incredible violence on our streets. You've supported defunding the police. You have got behind low bail and no bail policies that have let out criminals that shouldn't be on the streets. You've supported organizations like the Minnesota Freedom Fund that have, again, let out Minnesota criminals that should not be on our streets. And so you can, pretend to be incredible, capable attorney every day of the week, though I know many people in town would disagree with that. The fact is, Keith, you have the wrong priorities in the Attorney General's office. Minnesotans need an Attorney General's office that they can trust the judgment of our Attorney General. Right now, the Minnesotans feel like they cannot trust their Attorney General to have appropriate judgment. They cannot trust him to tell the truth. And unfortunately, Keith, that is a fact and part of the reason why you become so deeply unpopular in our state.
Let's let Keith Ellison respond, and then I'll ask you both the same question.
Jim, I want to sincerely tell you that I'm sorry about what happened to your sister, and I'm sorry what happened to you. It's horrible, and I want to be clear. That is a sincere statement. But Jim, that is exactly why we're suing Fleet Farm, because there are too many guns on the street. There's too many guns out there. There have been about 200 mass shootings in the last 300 days, and we're trying to make sure that gun sellers do so competently, do so without negligence, and are not aiding and abetting people who are engaged in gun trafficking. That's to protect your sister, man. And I mean that, because I heard your sister was a Northside resident. Yep. I'm a Northside resident. I raised all 4 of my kids on the North Side. And I want you to know that to you and your sister and your entire family, that is a horrible tragedy that we are trying to stop, but we've got to take guns off the street to do it. Now, you mentioned the whole thing around bail. Folks, in Minnesota, the Constitution says that every offense you can put up money bail, and if you raise enough, you can get out. All offenses are bailable. The fact of the matter is that bail bond agencies bail people out every single day. Some of those people abscond and disobey with their pretrial release conditions. And so what I'm saying is, should we discuss how to say that your pretrial release should depend upon your return to court and your dangerousness in the community? In the federal court, Jim, let me just explain this to you. In the federal court, if you are deemed to be dangerous or a flight risk, you can't get out at all. But on the other side, if you will come back to court, you can get out on a signature, and therefore you don't need to put up any money. I guess I would disagree with you that just having a strict system where 2 people are accused of doing the same thing, one has money, one doesn't, and the one with the money gets out pre-trial, and the other one without money sits in jail, and sometimes ends up pleading guilty to a crime that they don't believe they commit simply to get credit for time served. I just don't agree that we don't need to look at our bail system, but I think we should do it carefully. We should include everybody in the conversation, and it should not be money that makes the determination.
Jim Schultz, quickly.
Now, I'd say a couple things there. Now, you may not know this, Keith, because you really haven't been at the legislature during your time as Attorney General. Ramsey County Sheriff Bob Fletcher has said you've been completely absent from public safety discussions at the legislature. But there was actually a bill to increase the penalties associated with straw purchases in Minnesota, to increase the penalties associated with straw purchases. That died. Your office said nothing about it, did nothing to push it forward. And now, your solution to violent crime in Minnesota is suing Fleet Farm. Suing Fleet Farm. That's your solution to violent crime in Minnesota. Do you really think, Keith, that violent crime in Minnesota is going to be addressed in full by suing Fleet Farm? That's your solution, and maybe suing a couple other businesses. How about this? How about instead of that, or maybe alongside that, we aggressively prosecute violent crime? We have an Attorney General's office that uses the tools available to it under 602, 902, to aggressively prosecute crimes that are under RICO, to ensure that we have an adequately resourced office that this isn't just 3 criminal prosecutors, up from 1 just a year ago, but 3 criminal prosecutors in an office of 150 attorneys to support the work of county attorneys around the state. So it is not enough for the Attorney General of Minnesota to throw up his hands and say, in October of election year, well, I think I'm going to go after, spin the wheel, Fleet Farm. That is not enough, Keith. And the fact is, the fact that you cite that as an instance of you leading on public safety is a complete and total embarrassment.
Keith, no, I actually cite the near 50 cases that we're prosecuting now as evidence of my leadership on public safety. But let me just say this about Fleet Farm. It's important for everybody listening to know that the thing that really got this case started, Jim, there's nothing about the timing that should concern you. Mayor Carter called me and said, after the tragic shooting about a year ago at West 7th, where 14 people were shot and 1 was killed, said, look, man, this guy is over here buying guns, and these guns turned up in the West 7th shooting at the truck stop. And there's got to be something we can do to cut off the supply. Is there anything we can do? So you know what? It's nothing like this, to our knowledge, has been done before. So we got to work doing the research. We found it, we worked on it, and when it was ready, we filed the case. So that's what's going on, Jim. It's the fact that we listened to a mayor, responded to a mass shooting incident where 14 people were shot and 1 died, and the woman who lost her daughter stood with me just the other day and said, "I'm glad you're doing this." This woman hugged me, and I was almost in tears, Jim, I honestly was, because this woman had lost the most precious person in her life. It's not politics, man. It's real. It's serious. And going upstream with on guns is the right thing to do. And let me also say, you say that's the only program. It's not the only program. It's the over $300 million dealing with the opioid crisis. It's the bad landlords who, in North Minneapolis, we brought a lawsuit against a guy named Steve Meldahl, had 267 properties that were in such bad condition that Judge Robin, in his order, found. He wrote, "The conditions described here are so bad, they are of biblical plague proportions, rats, gnats, and mice," and he cited for us against this bad landlord. That's part of keeping the community safe. So it's opioids, it's safe housing, it's dealing with nuisance properties that we're dealing with right now, trying to make sure that the proper conduct is going on at those businesses. And before you get too sympathetic to these folks, like you are about ExxonMobil, by the way, let me just note that other Northside liquor stores do run a good business. This one that you're criticizing me about, Merwin's, is a public nuisance, and we're dealing with it right now.
Okay.
I wish you joined me in that.
Let's remind everybody you're listening to a debate between DFL Attorney General Keith Ellison and his Republican challenger Jim Schultz, live on MPR News. I'm Mike Mulcahy. I'd like to get to some other topics if we can, if that's all right with you, Jim Schultz.
Can I just say one more thing? So Keith Ellison going after Fleet Farm, it's been out there for a while, but he's going after Fleet Farm. He's going after liquor stores that frankly have been nuisance properties for years, Keith. But he does it in September of election year. And then he says, well, I prosecuted 50 cases. 50 cases in over the course of 4 years amidst the greatest increase in violent crime in Minnesota's history. 50 cases, Keith. Now, I'm glad we got justice in those instances. I'm sure the families are incredibly grateful. Think about how many more families could have been delivered justice, things could have been prevented because we had justice on our streets. We could have had it. We don't have it because of your lack of leadership, Keith.
Okay, Keith Ellison, I'll give you like 30 seconds here.
We have taken all of the cases that the county referred to us, and we have responded with civil remedies that have been effective and delivered good outcomes for people. We've never lost a single case.
Let's change the subject. There's been a lot of talk about abortion in this year's campaign. So let's just zoom out a little bit and be clear. Jim Schultz, what is your position on abortion? How will you use the Attorney General's office over the next 4 years to address that issue?
Sure. Well, I've been very clear. I'm pro-life. I'm not ashamed of that. I will tell you, though, I didn't step into this race to get caught up in abortion policy. I could step into this race because of the violent crime destroying our communities. And the fact is, what I've promised and what I've indicated in the Attorney General's office is that I will not leverage my office for abortion policy. We need an office that is apolitical, that simply does justice every single day. Whether you're black or white, rich or poor, a man or a woman, you get justice every day. It's apolitical, irrespective of the issues that are out there. I will not lead in the legislative debates around abortion or other issues that are not intrinsically connected to the work of the Attorney General's office. Whatever the law in Minnesota is around abortion, I will enforce and defend it. I've made that very clear. And the fact is the Attorney General's office in Minnesota needs to be focused on violent crime, nonprofit fraud, and holding businesses accountable for their actions. Those will be my priorities when I'm the Attorney General.
Didn't you say when you were seeking the endorsement that you would look at First Amendment cases involving, say, pharmacists who didn't want to dispense medication for abortion?
Well, it's very much an ancillary issue, but I have said, just as a policy matter, we have to create space for religious minorities in our country to be protected, whether they're Muslim, whether they're Christian, whether they're people practicing indigenous faiths or otherwise. And so we do need to ensure that the religious rights of people in Minnesota particularly religious minorities of people in Minnesota, are stood up for. I will tell you, I didn't get into this race for that issue. I got into this race because of the violent crime in our communities.
Keith Ellison, what's your position on abortion, and how will you use the office over the next 4 years to address that issue?
Well, women and everyone in our state can count on me to stand up for their rights to have a safe legal abortion, full stop. They can count on me if they come to our state and they have an abortion here. I will defend their right to travel here and to do what is legal here. If some other state tries to extradite someone, I will oppose that. I believe that people have the right to bodily autonomy. I've always believed that. I'm consistent on that. Jim's not telling you that he also said in the primary that he would go on offense. Certainly said that. Maybe he could explain why. And also, he's on the board. He helped start a fake abortion clinic that tries to lure women in who are seeking abortions and then tries to give them misinformation as they seek to get that abortion care that they're looking for. And that place has its motto to make abortion not only illegal but unthinkable. And they tell people things like abortion causes cancer and all bunch of things that aren't even true. So look, Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett all said, I'll just follow the law. What did they do the second they got a chance to rip down Roe? That is exactly what they did. They destroyed it, and that's what happened. I'm not really buying it, Jim. Sorry.
The state of Minnesota, though, did have several laws that restricted abortion. The case went to court. Your office lost the decision. The judge threw out those restrictions, and you chose not to appeal.
That's right.
Why?
Because we had already put 4,000 hours into the case at the district court level. We'd spent about $660,000 in salary time. We briefed the issue thoroughly, and Judge Gilligan issued an order that was around 100 pages, if not more. And it was well researched. We thought it was thought out, and we thought the chances of success were very minimal. So on the basis of just resources, we decided that an appeal was not in the interest of the people of the state of Minnesota.
Jim Schultz, he wanted to respond.
Yeah, I mean, there's a variety of misinformation in the Attorney General's statements there. It's hard to track through all of it. The fact is, everyone knows I stepped into this race to deal with the extraordinary violent crime consuming our communities. The fact is, the Attorney General's office has extraordinarily little influence over abortion policy in the state of Minnesota. And the fact is, Keith Ellison is using this as a distraction to get away from his failed record around violent crime, his failed record presiding over $250 million going out the door to a nonprofit the Department of Education and everyone else knew was fraudulent, to distract from his other incredible failures in his office. That's a fact. And at the end of the day, when Minnesotans go to the polls, they're going to be focused on wanting an Attorney General who is competent and who is focused on the violent crimes taking the lives of the sons and daughters of Minnesota.
Keith Ellison, but let's just keep the answers a little shorter because...
I'll keep it tight, sorry. Look, I think Minnesotans want an Attorney General who will protect their wallets and pocketbooks, their safety, and their rights. That's the job. I mean, here's the thing. You don't get to just say, I'm only here to work on one issue, which I don't have any legal authority for. You've got to deal with what comes to the door. I did not know we were going to have a global pandemic that would take the life of over 13,700 Minnesotans. I didn't know that that George Floyd was going to be killed. You can't just say, I'm here only for one thing. No, you got to deal with everything. That's why me leading organizations like the Attorney General's office, like my own law firm, like the Legal Rights Center, that's why by being in Congress, by being in the state legislature, by practicing law for 32 years, that's why all of that really, really matters, because I bring all of it to bear to help lead the state. Jim, you know, it's not just legal. It's not just litigation experience he lacks. He hasn't run any large organizations, and he has no public experience at all. So, I mean, there's a lot of deficits here.
I'll let you respond to that in just a minute, Jim Schultz. But Keith Ellison, this Feeding Our Future case was brought up.
Thanks for bringing it up.
When was the magnitude of this alleged fraud first brought to your attention, and what steps did your office take when you heard about this?
Thanks for asking. Here's the thing. This is a successful investigation and prosecution that was a collaboration between federal authorities and the state of Minnesota. There were 49 people who have been indicted. 3 of them have pled guilty today and are cooperating. And because of the collaboration, we believe that this whole thing has been pulled out root and branch. We found out, to answer your question directly, that there were discrepancies as early as the winter of 2020. That's why Feeding Our Future sued the state, and that's why they brought this matter to court alleging racial discrimination and a bunch of other stuff. But before that happened, we were in touch with the Department of Agriculture, the FBI, the Department of Justice, the IRS was involved, the United States Postal Service. There were a number of agencies involved in this investigation. But here's the thing, Mike, you got to understand. You cannot talk about an pending investigation. You can't talk about it. If you do talk about it, you tip off the fraudsters. If you tip off the fraudsters, phones get wiped, computers get wiped, documents get burned, people abscond and run out of the country, as 2 of them tried to do. And so at the end of the day, we have 49 indictments. 3 have already pled guilty. We've identified property and we'll retrieve it, and we've got to the bottom of a fraud.
Okay.
They're
Jim
trying
Schultz,
to turn this into politics.
Well, let's let Jim Schultz
What's going on is a fraud investigation.
I'm going to take a little bit of extra time on this one, if that's okay. So in May of 2020, it became pretty evident to the Department of Education and others that there was serious fraud going on in Feeding Our Future. From that time until the end, there was over $200 million went out the door, almost 250, almost the entirety of that amount went out thereafter. The Attorney General's office in Minnesota represented the Department of Education through that. During that, the feds were not involved at that time. The FBI was not involved. The U.S. Attorney Office was not involved. They were informed in April 2021. So there's no kind of concerns about dealing with it, about getting in the way of their investigation through that time. Instead of advising the Department of Education to halt payments, instead of ensuring that they did an investigation in which it would have been pretty straightforward. It would not have taken Sherlock Holmes to crack this case. What you do is you subpoena the bank records associated with the accounts. And you see that those amounts are going to individuals who are going to buy properties worth a couple $1 million, or going to buy $90,000 trucks and so forth. This was not a significant case to handle. And unfortunately, the Attorney General's office, for some reason, maybe it was the campaign contributions, Keith, that you received from people associated with Feeding Our Future. Maybe it was something else, but you didn't pursue it. And then now, you've been lying about it consistently, Keith. First, it was the judge who made you do it. Who made you send out $200 million to people everyone knew was fraudulent. Then, it was the FBI who made you do it. I will tell you, the FBI does not tell victims of theft to send out $200 million to people you know to be thieves. So that's a lie. And then, Keith, you said to Vanina Soccer on the radio, you said you can't tell the truth about it because of attorney-client privilege. Again, a complete and total lie. Finally, you said you have no authority over it. That is, again, a complete and total lie. 602, 902, you could have brought a case under RICO to aggressively prosecute them, and you didn't. Keith, this is representative of the level of incompetence in your office and the level of dishonesty that you bring to the office.
Keith Ellison.
No, this is representative of the level of politics that's been going on in this race. Now, here's the reality. We contacted federal authorities, and they said, look, you've got to, we have an ongoing pending investigation. You cannot reveal that we're doing this. That's the reality of the situation. We know now that the investigation was sensitive, and that we had very aggressive litigants in this matter, and they could not be informed as to the investigation that was going on. Now, so that's the reality with the FBI. Now, let me just say this: if you have any doubts about that, let me just make it clear. Andy Lugar and the special agent in charge have had nothing but praise for the role that the state played. They have not done any of this stuff that the Republicans are trying to do. They have said, we want to thank the state for the role that they played in getting to the bottom of this fraud. Okay. Now, let me just say this about...
Let's let Jim Schultz respond.
So what the FBI said is they thanked the state for their cooperation. The FBI always does that so long as you don't throw a wrench into investigation.
They don't always do that.
That's what an FBI investigation will do. The fact is, Keith, you're pitting it on the FBI now. Who actually is the special agent in charge, Keith? Do you know his name? His name is Joe Thompson.
Of course,
and that's Representative Keith. You don't. I don't think you haven't been
involved
in this topic.
Answer.
You haven't been involved in this. You haven't been involved in this investigation.
I know the facts going back 3. I mean, I've known special agents in charge for years, Jim.
Yeah. Oh, have you? Okay. Well, you didn't seem to know that one. But the fact is, Keith, you were completely disconnected from this case.
One at a time,
Completely disconnected from this case. You've been completely missing in action on this matter and so many other matters in the state of Minnesota. The fact is you've been focused on pleasing your far-left extreme base that represents a small minority of Minnesotans, a small fraction of Minnesotans. And the fact is you were completely missing in action, and the result is $250 million at least, that we know of, has gone out the door to people everyone knew were fraudsters. And now you're saying this is a success. Keith, if that is a success, I would want to see what failure looks like, because this is the greatest failure in nonprofit oversight in Minnesota's history.
Keith Ellison, 30 seconds, then we have to move to closing statements.
Look, we have 49 indictments for fraudsters. 3 have pled guilty with the cooperation of the state. That is what has happened. Andy Lugar and the SAC have been clear that the state was helpful, did the right thing, and praised the work that we did. What you're hearing here is pure politics.
All right. Well, this has been a really good discussion. I appreciate both of you for having been here, and I think we should have scheduled 2 hours because there's a lot more to talk about. But unfortunately, we're up against the clock. Jim Schultz, you have 1 minute to close out here.
My animating principle in life is that every person, black, brown, or white, rich or poor, man or woman, is a child of God. They're a child of God that is of invaluable worth and that has rights that must be protected and defended. When I am the Attorney General, I will fight for all Minnesotans every day of the week. And we have to turn the page in this Attorney General's office. It's been held by one single party for over 50 years. We need change. We need a recalibration of that office to focus on the fundamental challenges that Minnesotans face. Right now, we have an Attorney General focused on other things. We have an Attorney General who's demonstrated his extremism by backing defunding the police, his incompetence by his failures in feeding our future, and dishonesty in lying about both. We have to turn the page to a new future for the state of Minnesota.
Keith Ellison, closing statement.
Let me thank you, MPR, and Jim Schultz today. You know, friends, we have a stark choice in front of us. I have led an office that prosecuted over 50 people, 27 successfully. We've never lost. Jim has never prosecuted anyone. He's never even stepped into court. I'll protect your right to choose. He will attack it. I've protected the wages, the farmers. I protected the consumers of people, and Jim, as a hedge fund lawyer, has enlarged the assets of the richest people in the world. In fact, during the pandemic, hedge funds made record profits, and so did his favorite group to stand up for, which is ExxonMobil. I'm the people's lawyer. I guess he's the ExxonMobil lawyer. The choice is clear. I ask for your vote.
Again, thank you very much. Wonderful discussion. I think it served our listeners well. Really appreciate it. Now we tell people to go out and vote.
That's right.
Make your choice. That is DFL Attorney General Keith Ellison, the Republican nominee Jim Schultz. Thanks again to both of our candidates for being here today and participating in this debate. We do have another debate coming up on October 28th between the leading candidates for governor, incumbent DFLer Tim Walz and Republican Scott Jensen. Again, that's October 28th at noon. Our producer today was Jeff Jones with help from Twyla Dang. Special thanks to Tom Campbell, Eric Stromstead, and Susie Kim Scott. I'm Mike Mulcahy. Thanks so much for listening today, and have a great weekend.
Thank you.